Here we go. Let's, why don't we get started? Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Julian Chang, and on behalf of the Chinese Globalization Association, I'd like to welcome you to this iteration of our webinar series, China Goes Global. This year, as everybody knows, we had our virtual conference back in August, and this is a third of our webinar series on different aspects of Chinese globalization. The Chinese Globalization Association was established to disseminate and support research on the various aspects of China's enterprise globalization. We are composed of member universities from around the globe. Our board membership is composed of professors from American, European, and Chinese universities. And several of them are here today. I'd just like to give a shout out to Professor Zhang Wenxian, myself Latiman, Ilana Long, John McIntyre, who will be coming later, Francesca Spigarelli, also coming later, and William Wanghua from EM Lyon, our partner in Shanghai. I look very much forward to hearing the comments today, and this is a webinar based on a book recently published, whose editor you will hear from in a sec. But I want to give grateful thanks from the association to Professor Wenxian Chang, who organized today's session, as well as all the authors who will be speaking to you later. And in particular, I'd like to thank the Jack Austin Center for Asia Pacific Business Studies at Simon Fraser University's Beatty School of Business in Vancouver, which is a co-sponsor of this year's series of webinars and content. And I would be remiss if I didn't also mention that our great team at EM Lyon Business School in Shanghai has been a technical wonder and organizational marvel getting all this together. And we very much appreciate their support and the efforts of Polly and Julia here today or tonight. So without further ado, I would like to pass the mic over to Professor Wenxian Zhang, who will introduce the book and today's seminar. So thank you very much and enjoy the next couple of hours. Wenxian?
Thank you so much, Julian. My name is Wenxian Zhang. I'm a professor at Rollins College, a board member of Chinese Globalization Association, and also the lead editor of Huawei Goes Global, the 2-volume academic set that has just been published by Palgrave Macmillan last month. All of you, we all know that Huawei is a symbol of the globalization of the Chinese enterprise in the 21st century. As one of the most powerful Chinese company in the global economy, Huawei is also the largest telecommunication equipment manufacturer and the leading consumer electronics producer in the world. Huawei is also a central piece in the current US-China trade war. So the goal of today's program is to provide a academic, multi-perspective examination on the business environment, corporate operations, the growth strategies, as well as the global challenges faced by the Chinese technology reform. Next. It is my great honor to commence today's program, as most of the speakers are also contributing authors for our new book, who will introduce themselves at the beginning of each presentation. Please note that each speaker has about 8 minutes to present his or her research on Huawei. We'll have a question and answer session in the end. You may send your questions through the Zoom chat box. We'll address as many as time permitting. We hope today's program will help us gain a better understanding on the globalization of Huawei and contribute to the ongoing public discourse on the Chinese technology giant. So without further delay, Dr. Francis Schortgen, please begin.
Oops. Well, welcome everybody. It's my pleasure to be here. And a good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. My name is Schortgen. I'm a professor of international studies and political science, as well as business at the University of Mount Union. And it's my pleasure to really to talk for a couple of minutes about my contribution to this exciting volume. My chapter was entitled Weaponizing Globalization, Chinese High-Tech in the Crosshairs of Geopolitics. And what I wanted to do in this chapter really is sort of set the broader context in which Chinese technology companies find themselves and why specifically they have been caught in the crosshairs of geopolitics. Next. So what I do in the chapter essentially is taking sort of a three-pronged approach, giving three different contexts. The first one, which I entitled is national innovation context. And I think one of the ways to get started there is to really get a good understanding of the technology and innovation ecosystem that the Chinese government has been producing over the years. And within that context, I talked about two major initiatives or policies that the Chinese government has been pursuing. The first one being the Made in China 2025 initiative. And the goal of that initiative essentially was to move to transition China from more of an export-oriented manufacturing superpower to more of an innovation-driven advanced technology superstate. And this is, of course, one initiative that has generated significant reservations, especially in the United States. The second policy or initiative was the Next Generation Artificial Intelligence Development Plan. And with that initiative, Beijing has really sort of signaled its intentions to become sort of the center of artificial intelligence research and theory development. Next. So the second context I focused on was the overall competition, because in order to understand the challenges and the opportunities that Huawei is facing in its international expansions, it is important to understand the overall environment in which it is operating in. And so, of course, there is the concern in the United States where there has been a lot of pushback against Huawei that the US might be losing the race for 5G leadership. As a matter of fact, if you look at the situation in the United States right now, the US strategy, or some might say maybe a sort of a lack of a concerted strategy of sustaining a technology and innovation leadership, has actually largely failed thus far to deliver really concrete results. Instead, what we are seeing a little bit more, and this is sort of a replay of, in many ways, what happened in the 1980s, when techno-globalism was replaced by techno-nationalism in the face of Japanese companies coming to the United States. And so what I'm talking about in that context essentially is that America's ability to aspire for continued and dominant technological leadership has been constrained by a number of factors. And these are not just one-off factors, they're sort of cumulative factors, they're corrosive factors, and that's a combination of arrogance in some way, and also hubris. The fact that we have been on top means that, well, we will always be on top, and that is certainly not a given. In fact, the sources of America's innovation capacity are really what the deteriorating innovation capacity in the United States, rather, is very much the result of a significant underinvestment, relatively speaking, compared to other countries in R&D, an underperforming education system, mostly in STEM fields, and a range of other factors. Adding to that is also the realization that industrial economies no longer necessarily hold a monopoly on the building blocks of innovation. And the reason for that is that you find Silicon Valleys everywhere, there's human capital everywhere, there's financial capital everywhere. So there's, of course, going to be a steep competition. And that then means that the growing global capability for innovation, or in some cases even disruptive innovation, is actually casting doubt on the ability of the United States to continue to maintain first mover advantages going forward. And when it comes to Huawei in particular, in the competition context, Huawei is one of a few companies that can build a full-fledged 5G network, of course, and that has the US somewhat worried because we don't have that. But the timing of Huawei also comes in. The timing is, it's not the most opportune time for Huawei to try to expand in the US. We had seen a lot of backlash over the years, most notably beginning under the Trump administration when we had the onset of a US-China trade war with the imposition of tariffs on in April 2018 of about 1,300 Chinese products. And then it was a tit for tat over the next couple of months and years. So that has complicated the opportunities for Huawei. At the same time, there's also a strategic concern or a national security concern that comes in. Next. So the geostrategic, the national security concern relates to the fact that what the US is experiencing is a gradual decline in overall global economic leadership and innovation capacity. The gradual decline in economic leadership, that's sort of by our own doing in a way, because we don't have that coherent, consistent policy. We don't have anything like the Belt and Road Initiative, for example, that the Chinese government is putting out. The innovation capacity, as I already mentioned, we are beginning to slide somewhat. And that has sort of triggered this, maybe a knee-jerk reaction when there's competition from overseas, especially competition from non-Western companies. And that is, again, where the liability of foreigners comes in. Because if you look at the trend over the last couple of years, and it's not just peculiar to Huawei, there's a number of Chinese companies that have been scrutinized above and beyond commercial grounds. Everything seems to be looked at first and foremost through a national security lens. There's always the concern that the activities of China Inc. with Chinese state capitalism may not be sort of for the purpose of commercial goals, of commercial gains, but it's more strategic driven, that the Chinese government might be behind it. And that unnecessarily complicates the evaluation, the commercial evaluations of Chinese companies' international expansion. To give you one example of this, the United States has sort of implemented a new act called the Foreign Investment Risk Modernization Act, which essentially sort of builds on or extends the jurisdiction of the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. And specifically through that Modernization Act, a lot of foreign investments are scrutinized through the lens of national security. So what we are really looking at essentially is a lot of the debate about the US-China relations has been shaped through trade war, but we're actually looking more at the tech war. And the Huawei is just the latest example, maybe the most prominent example of a company that finds itself sort of engulfed in that tech war. It's in the crosshairs of geopolitics, just because it has capabilities that the US finds might put its own companies at a competitive disadvantage. So then, of course, the way I conclude my chapter is really asking that question, where does that leave us? And where does that leave the fortunes and the ambitions of Chinese companies like Huawei? Are we seeing essentially a decoupling of the technology cooperation, of the technology fields between the US and China? And I think what you're seeing is actually that is beginning to happen. The question is it going to deepen? And also, what are the longer term costs and implications of that? Because right now the signs are very clearly pointing in the direction that the longer term consequences and costs far outweigh any short-term gains that the West, or in this case the US, might actually reap from that. So the question is, can we actually prevent that decoupling leading into a giant rift? And if so, how do we do that? Do we do it through constructive competition in the emerging technology areas in the future? Or do we allow the continued politicization to sort of shape the overall debate? Until we find a resolution to that, unless and until we have more of a constructive competition and maybe also a certain degree of cooperation, I'm afraid that Chinese companies like Huawei and other tech giants might continue to find themselves in the crosshairs of geopolitics. So that is essentially what I try to do in the chapter, giving readers sort of the broad perspective rather than just zooming in on the commercial and economic aspects. You need to understand the environment in which companies are operating. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those very exciting insights, Francis. And I would very much like to build on what you just said by presenting this research piece that I wrote with my co-author, Dirk Holtbrügge. My name is Kirste. I am a German research and teaching associate at the University of Erlangen-Nürnberg. And today I would like to dig a little bit deeper into the 5G network rollout and how that causes global interdependencies. Next slide, please. So 5G is the new standard for universal mobile telecommunication systems. And it is, while you might believe that 4G on your smartphone is already insanely fast, it is even faster. That means that you can bridge geographic space in what is really, really extremely close to real time. That means that 5G will have applications in our everyday lives virtually everywhere. That means smart traffic, self-driving cars, but also medical applications. So for example, you can imagine a surgeon doing home office because this person will be able to complete robotic surgery by not even being in the same room, not even necessarily in the same building or in the same country. So of course, with technology that this has so many wide, important, and really deep digging applications in our everyday lives comes a very large responsibility and also a fear that this technology might be implemented for other purposes that are not socially desirable, such as, of course, espionage. But there have also been a lot of allegations regarding deviant applications of this software. So for example, of course, it might even be possible in the future to interrupt commodity supply. So it is really extremely important to look at where does this technology come from and how will the network rollout look like. Next slide, please. There has been an extremely heated debate on where supplies for the network rollout should come from. And to move away from this very emotional debate and from this debate that is largely built on also political aspects, on discussions, I would like to raise 3 points how the Western approach and the Chinese digitalization approach are just very fundamentally different, and how this, of course, nurtures these aspects in this discussion. So first off, the Western version of the internet is built on a rule-based and capitalistic system. That means that users trust that they can apply the law throughout the internet. They know that they have verifiable information, and the entire system is built on verifiable information. While on the other hand, the Chinese version of the internet is mostly a data-driven and meritocratic structure, and it is also implemented to be meritocratic. That means that users are, of course, evaluated based on their actions, based on their behaviors, and also punished for them, which is not the case in a Western version of the internet, where anonymity is a very major factor. Also, the Western internet is mostly built on open source and open innovation. That means, for example, if you look at Android, you can look at the entire source code of this system that operates digital devices. That means that as a user, I have an overview of what can my device actually do and what can it not do. There are no such thing as backdoors. And if there are, they're extremely difficult to implement, and they are very likely to be caught. China has implemented a very massive national innovation strategy that Francis has also mentioned with Made in China 2025. There is a lot of rumor also going on about espionage software. And the thing is that with a philosophy that is not built on open source and open innovation, it is of course possible to implement parts of a network structure that are opaque and that might even do things that you as a user wouldn't know that it does. It's just a different form of philosophy. And then of course the Western internet is transnationally accessible. So that means that it spans geographical borders and different jurisdictions. While the Chinese national internet is by far not as transnational, it is literally a national network that is built behind a firewall protection that shields roughly 600 million users from transnational access. So to draw a conclusion, next slide, please. We can see that these fears are really not only built on irrationality and on political motive, but additionally, there is a liability of network philosophy that firms such as Huawei are facing. And there has been, of course, a lack of innovation, particularly if we look at Europe, if we look at Germany, innovations in the 5G network, they have been lacking. And as we can see from the amount of 5G patents and patents families, in particular, Huawei is of course a very major global player, but we also have Ericsson in Sweden. In Sweden, for example, has now banned Huawei components from being built in the 5G network. But they of course have a national provider of those components and are therefore not so much at risk. But if we, for example, look at Germany, there is no German supplier for 5G components. And of course, components that were developed in Europe are more expensive. They are slower to be produced. This is why Huawei still has an opportunity to enter this market. However, voices have become louder and louder stating that there is a fear that China might try to put pressure on those countries that use Huawei's or even other Chinese producers' 5G components, that they might put pressure on this country and that they might try to make them dependent on China. And of course, Huawei would need to be more open, to be more transparent, particularly with important aspects such as ownership. Thank you very much for your attention, and I now look forward to hearing my colleagues' presentations.
Thank you very much, Laura. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everywhere. My name is Mario Glowik. I'm in charge of International Strategic Management at the Berlin School of Economics and Law. And I'm happy and proud to provide you some insights of Huawei's market entry strategies in Germany and the Russian Federation through a network lens. Why I have chosen Germany and Russia is because both countries indicate different political attitudes towards China. And second, both countries serve as attractive or important target markets for Huawei. And third, the question is against the background of the EU sanctions against Russia and Russian sanctions against EU, whether Chinese firms, taking the case of Huawei, use that chance to strengthen its market entry activities in Russia. Next, please. So why I have chosen the network approach, for those who are familiar with internationalization theories, the network approach emphasizes on relationship buildings in comparison to traditional internationalization models, like, for example, the famous Uppsala model or the eclectic paradigm. And the network approach claims that instead of self-learning, firms, entrepreneurs also make use of learning through relationships. And these learning through relationships supports international market strategies, supports learning through relationships in order to gain market and technology knowledge. That is why I have chosen the network approach, the network lens in my book chapter, aiming to figure out the most important network actors Huawei has chosen since the end of the 1990s in Russia and Germany, and whether there are some differences in the network actors' positionings in both countries. Okay, next please. Let me start with Russia, just in brief. Huawei's activities in Russia started at the end of the 1990s. For a couple of years, the relationship activities of Huawei in Russia remained at a relatively marginal level. However, it's a matter of fact that since the EU launched sanctions against Russia, Huawei has particularly strengthened its relationship activities in Russia since 2014. And as you can see from the right chart, they mainly target telecommunication providers in Russia, as well as Russian railways. That is similar to Germany. I will talk about this later. And you know why Russian railways serves as an important actor. We have to take this to understand this within the framework of the new Silk Road China is re-establishing, and that's why they have established a fine-grained relationship network or relationships to not only telecommunication providers but also Russian railways, and very recently also to the Russian Sberbank. For those who are involved a little bit in Russia and Russian economics, Sberbank is one of the most, or even the most powerful bank in Russia. It serves, for example, as a major financial backup for public financing. In comparison, if you move your attention to Germany, Huawei's activities started also at the end of the 1990s. However, the focus was clearly on gaining technological know-how. They agreed on a cooperation with Siemens. Later, that was further developed towards an international joint venture. And as a result of the research, we can say that Siemens contributed a lot in terms of the telecommunication know-how to Huawei at the beginning of their activity. In later years, then Huawei established fine-grained relationships, for example, to the Deutsche Telekom and Telefonica Deutschland, as well as Vodafone. If you take all these three together, you have more or less almost the complete German telecommunication market. Just Deutsche Telekom gains around 30% of the market share. And what is interesting is that the entire telecommunication network, including, for example, modems and antennas and the system, the backup, to a large extent is delivered by Huawei. And that means, for example, some politician makers theoretically claim let's ban Huawei. In business practice, it is not easy to immediately go separate ways from Huawei, because the technology has been built up tremendously by Huawei in recent years in Germany. And Huawei further fine-grained its relationship networks, meanwhile also to the Deutsche Bahn, which is the German railway. And that makes sense if you take then the entire picture, having the new Silk Road in mind, that the network Huawei is building up is just more than just finding customers and suppliers and entering the Russian and the German market. There's an entire concept in behind. And let me add why an entire concept. You see also the city of Duisburg and the city of Gelsenkirchen. And both cities are located in the western part of Germany, and these cities are known for steel production as well as coal mining. Meanwhile, these industries lost importance, and that's why these areas became rather, I wouldn't say poor, but they are suffering. And all kind of investors are highly appreciated. And Huawei took that chance and agreed with the mayor of Duisburg and Gelsenkirchen and their connected relationships to politician makers, aiming to build up a smart city, including the traffic control, digitalization, the energy supply, and of course, the traffic. You know, in these days, around 20 trains from China arrive in Duisburg. Duisburg is said it's the very end in the west of that Silk Road. And that is, from my point of view, a very smart approach, that the engagement in the entire infrastructure and selling entire, I may say, business solutions within the background of smart cities. Next, please. And that I would like to conclude my brief introduction to my book chapter. From my point of view, the market entry concepts of Huawei have been very successful from my point of view, and it's even impressive because it was done, I may say, without any noise, and it had been developed over the years towards an approach that Huawei understands very well the different political systems in Russia and Germany, and they have developed accordingly fine-grained relationships. If you take Russia to the Kremlin, because the central power is located in Moscow, and when you take the federal system in Germany, and you see they have developed relationships to local governments as well. So that's why, thank you very much, and I would be more than happy if you get more insights, not only from my book chapter, but from the entire book and all the contributions of my authors. Thank you so much.
I would also like to welcome everybody. My name is Agnes Sudomar. I'm from the Institute of World Economics, as well as from the Corvinus University of Budapest, both of them located in Hungary. So we have just heard about Huawei in Germany and Russia, and now let's focus on what's in between, that is Central and Eastern Europe. This book chapter, I mean the content of the book chapter, is going to be presented by me, although I would like to emphasize that it was a collaboration of 3 researchers from the Central and Eastern European region, Joanna Karas from the Warsaw School of Economics, Poland, and Julian Monica Öler-Sinkai from the Institute for World Economy, Romanian Academy. Next, please. So as I've mentioned, this book chapter is focusing on Huawei in Central and Eastern Europe from 2 aspects. The first part of the chapter analyzes Huawei's CEE operations by focusing on the company's activities in Poland, Hungary, and Romania, as these 3 countries are among the most important European bases for Huawei in this region. But the chapter also presents Central and Eastern European countries' approach towards and engagement with the company before and after the so-called Huawei security scandal. We examined how China, Huawei, and its growing presence are perceived by the media in the analyzed countries by using media content analysis. And in this short presentation of mine, I would like to focus on this latter aspect of the book. Otherwise, it would be too long. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as I've mentioned, we decided to use media content analysis. We collected approximately 150 Hungarian, Romanian, and Polish articles written in local languages between 2018 and 2019, where Huawei is mentioned. We collected not only those articles focusing on the respective Central and Eastern European market, but also those centered on Huawei's global operations, since we thought that a more critical opinion is sometimes easier to formulate when it happens to other countries, not us. We try to detect media sources, usually supporting the respective CEE governments, as well as supporting its opposition, to make the research more balanced. For the research, we selected 15 to 20 of the most widely read media sources in all the 3 countries, which have a nationwide coverage. It means dailies, weeklies with a political or economic focus, as well as online media platforms. And of course, we investigated both mainstream media and tabloids that are public as well as privately owned. Next one, please. And finally, a few words about the results of this research. So in general, we can say that although the Central Eastern European region has been very keen on building the 5G infrastructure and has been willing to collaborate with Huawei on this matter, the pressure from the US has influenced or had influence on several CE countries' decisions in this regard. In 2019, some CE countries such as Estonia, Romania, and Poland signed a memorandum of understanding with the US to strengthen cooperation on 5G security and development, restricting the use of the Chinese mobile technology company, especially Huawei's products. Other countries, such as, for instance, Lithuania, have taken a more careful approach, saying that decisions on Huawei technologies must be made at either a NATO or EU levels, while others, such as Latvia, Serbia, or Hungary, decided to continue to work with Huawei. It seems that although on the political level, the majority of CE countries may not want to give China more leverage, but on the business level, they actually do it quite often. The reason is quite simple. Huawei is ahead in developing the 5G technology. There is no stronger, more prepared and cheaper player on the market. They are willing to invest, and other companies from the EU do not offer better solutions in the CE region so far. So while the CE government's stance doesn't necessarily reflect the shift in CE society's attitudes towards Huawei after the security scandal, we decided to analyze how CE media perceived and perceive right now Huawei in order to show CE countries' approach towards and engagement with the company. So when it comes to the Polish media, Huawei featured there in the analyzed period predominantly against the backdrop of the Belt and Road Initiative and the rivalry between the US and China. The tone of most of the commentaries in the Polish media was rather critical, especially in the pro-government conservative media, which supports the Polish pro-American stance in international relations. The media in Poland mainly stipulated that using Huawei products may be considered not secure. So this was a quite negative perception, if you like. Even if Romania doesn't have an official position towards the ongoing US-China trade war at large, but the Romanian president expressed for the first time 1 year ago a clear position as regards 5G. This statement they issued together with the US president and the Romanian president on the occasion of the latter's visit to the US underlines that Romania is seeking to avoid the security risks that accompany Chinese investments in 5G telecommunication networks. Some of the analyzed Romanian articles were very critical as regards Huawei from the perspective of security issues and the links to the Chinese government. At the same time, there are neutral opinions as well as interviews with managers of Huawei Romania that focused on the company's strengths and the opportunities Romania can have from this cooperation. The Hungarian media was quite different, both from the Romanian and the Polish one. Huawei featured in the Hungarian media several times in the analyzed period, both in pro and anti-government media sources, but almost none of these articles mentioned Hungary or referred to potential risks that Huawei's Hungarian engagement could pose to the country. Hungary went even further than the already mentioned Latvia or other countries that suggested to work together with Huawei in the future, since the Hungarian Minister of Foreign Affairs already announced in Beijing last year that Huawei will build the Hungarian 5G wireless network. This gesture worked out relatively well, since Huawei have just announced that it will establish a research and development center in Hungary. So it seems that in return for being pro-Huawei, the Hungarian government managed to receive this long-awaited dream, a research center, a research and development center by Huawei in Hungary. So as you can see, even the Central and Eastern European region is one region, but the interests, the approaches, as well as the perceptions are diverging in this region. And even if we are looking at only those 3 countries analyzed in our research, you may find completely different opinions and completely different strategies. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our book webinar. My name is Serena Haddad. I'm an assistant professor at Rollins College, Florida, in the United States, in the business department. And unfortunately, my co-author and colleague, Shariel Naminget, who worked on this chapter as well, could not be here today. In our book chapter, we'll take you all the way to Southeast Asia and address Huawei's presence in Southeast Asia and how Huawei has been a long-time partner with the telecommunication companies in the Southeast Asian countries. In our chapter, we discuss the history of Huawei in Southeast Asia and how it addressed the country's 3G and 4G network needs. We also discussed the US-China sanctions and how it might have affected the recent 5G-related business dealings of Huawei in Southeast Asia. Next. While the carrier market was dominated by industry giants when Huawei started establishing its international presence, Huawei was able to penetrate the Southeast Asian market in the late 1990s and build strong relationships with the countries. Huawei established loyal customers in the region by offering unparalleled customer and community service. For example, during natural disasters, Huawei engineers go to disaster sites to help operators restore telecom services. Moreover, Huawei offered financial contribution to disaster relief programs to help affected communities, and such level of service is uncommon in the industry. Huawei continued to gain favor in the community by investing in social programs and development initiatives, grooming local talent, and building local labs that provide jobs and contribute to developing countries. In the next few slides, we'll talk about the history of Huawei in the Southeast Asian countries, how the US sanctions might have affected their business, and then conclude. Next. With high quality customer and community services, Huawei started to become an essential provider of 3G and 4G network needs of telecommunication companies in almost all of the 10 Southeast Asian countries. In the Philippines, Huawei started working with Globe Telecom in 2011. Globe Telecom selected Huawei after a thorough evaluation of vendor proposals as its partner in implementing a $700 million network modernization program. In Malaysia, Huawei has been a long-time supplier to the Malaysian telecommunications companies, and Maxis, the market leader in the telecom industry in Malaysia, has been working with Huawei for almost 10 years. In Indonesia, one of the largest communication service providers in the country has been doing business with Huawei since 2012. The two partners recently renewed a 5-year contract authorizing Huawei to be the provider of operations, maintenance, and network performance management. In Vietnam, Viettel, which is owned by the Vietnamese military, bought 3G equipment from Huawei in 2009. However, the company no longer uses Huawei equipment in its 4G network. In Singapore, Huawei has been working with the 3 leading telecom network providers for years: Singtel, StartHub, and M1. And in 2019, Huawei started offering trade-in prices with these 3 companies. In Thailand, Huawei has partnered with the 3 major mobile network providers: TrueMove, HDTAC, and AIS. Huawei has been working with TrueMove for 20 years now, and it is its 4G network equipment provider. In Laos, Huawei has partnered with many local telecom companies since 1998. Huawei's communication network service covers 70% of Laos consumers. In Brunei, Huawei has partnered with the two leading telecom providers. Since 2010, the government started pushing telecom companies to update their ICT, and the state-owned telecom company Telecom Brunei hired Huawei to support rolling out the 4G network. In Cambodia, Huawei has partnered with three leading telecom providers, Medphone, Smart Exatia, and Cellcard. All three companies launched their 4G or 4.5G networks in the last few years. And finally, in Myanmar, Huawei has been working for years in Myanmar and constructed 40% of the towers there, and Huawei's communications network services around 33% of Myanmar populations. With the much anticipated transformative effects of the 5G infrastructure, countries in Southeast Asia are predicted to benefit from this new wave of technological development. The 5G enabled faster mobile broadband connections and fixed wireless access. This can enhance consumer experience. One more paragraph, and then the next slide. As Huawei became the dominant player in the global market and the 5G rollout race, the US has accused Huawei of espionage, as many of the presenters and co-authors colleagues today mentioned. This accusation of espionage on intellectual property was followed by President Trump strongly warning other countries that Huawei potentially can represent a grave national security threat. In February 2019, the Trump administration escalated its attack on Huawei by banning US countries from doing business with Huawei, which caused a significant impact on its supply chain. The relationship between Huawei and Southeast Asian countries came to a test with these US sanctions. However, Huawei seemed to have established loyal customers and appears to remain the dominant player in Southeast Asia. Given the strong partnership between Huawei and Southeast Asia, Huawei may shift from American suppliers to suppliers in South Asia region, creating that positive cycle of supply chain. In conclusion, it was clear that Huawei's strong partnership with the Southeast Asian countries has significantly developed in the last few years, and Huawei seemed to be well positioned to hold its place in those countries. And now all the telecom companies, or most of them, have now indicated that in one way or another, they are partnering with Huawei. So Huawei is poised to capture the majority of the 5G market in the Southeast Asian countries, except in Vietnam, where geopolitical disputes with China influenced the country's approach not to work with Huawei. Huawei was able to successfully employ a global strategy, as many of my colleagues and co-authors mentioned. This business internationalization strategy focused on high cost reduction. Huawei's lower prices have been appealing to the price-conscious customers in the developing economies of Southeast Asia. Because of its strong brand equity, Huawei eventually transformed to an industry leader in Southeast Asia, partnering with most major mobile network providers. Huawei's strategy appears to follow a customer-based brand equity model, which says that a strong brand is shaped by how customers were made to think and feel about the product. So Huawei gained customers' affection and loyalty by providing excellent customer service. And thank you.
Thank you, Serena. Thank you so much for your important insights. And good morning, everyone. My name is William Zhou. I'm a PhD student of University of Massachusetts Law. Today, I'm very happy to share with you my research on red teaming strategy in Huawei. We found that Huawei uses red teaming strategy as an organizational learning method that strengthens its resilience. This is a joint work with my supervisor, Professor Sunny Lee Song from University of Massachusetts Law. Next slide, please. Originally coined by the military, the term red team is a proxy for an imaginary enemy within an organization. Many organizations have established their red team department. For example, IBM and eBay. Sun Tzu's ancient Chinese military work, The Art of War, developed the notion that oblique and frontal relationships engender each other. This statement has been explained as the mutual transformation of two forces. The frontal, which refers to the main force of the frontal battlefield, and the oblique, which refers to the red team. The main idea is consistent with the Tongji diagram, in which the white fish represents yang and the black fish represents yin. There is a black eye in the white fish and a white eye in the black fish. So the black eye in the white fish can be considered as a red team. So red team and blue team are mutually dependent. Next, please. Huawei always keeps a winter is coming conscious, which guideline is red team strategy. Quoting Zhang, "It is spring now, but that means winter is not far away." With winter is coming conscious, Huawei established a red team in the 1990s, among the first in Chinese firms. Ren Zhengfei said the red team is trying to find a way to deny the blue team. So the basic purpose of establishing red team is to actively create conflicts instead of reduce conflicts. Huawei uses red team basically for main three different functions. First, red team strategy can be used for a mutual transformation between red and blue teams. When the context is appropriate, red team department can be quickly transformed into a blue team department, and blue team department can then be transformed to a red team. So Huawei remains resilient and agile under any circumstances. Second, Huawei uses red team to learn from its rivals. Third, Huawei uses red team as a backup plan. For example, when Huawei got banned from the US Bureau of Industry and Security, it used its own high silicon chip, which was originally prepared as a backup plan, or a red team. The next plan B, Harmony OS, is also well prepared if Google does not issue a continuous license of the Android operation system. Next slide, please. Through a case study, we find that the main purpose of red team strategy is to actively create conflicts within an organization. This is actually a strategic paradox for all companies. The paradox suggests that management models and organizational characteristics both appear and are developed in a contradictory manner. Although the logic between these features seem to be interdependent and irrational, they often appear and are related at the same time. To solve this paradox, management scholars have suggested that we accept the tension generated by contradictions to differentiate, integrate, or replace the contradictions in public opinions, and to accommodate contradictions in order to produce new synergies. Red team strategy also helps build organizational ambidexterity, which ensures both exploitation and exploration. Exploitation is important to ensure current competitive advantage, but exploration is important to ensure future competitive advantage. Then a difficult question is how to achieve ambidexterity or reach a balance between exploitation and exploration. We found that Huawei uses red team strategy to ensure ambidexterity. Firms can establish red team department to quickly test new products and services, and then swiftly move to promote these products. Red team strategy also helps Huawei remain vigilant before a crisis, similar to the winter is coming conscious. Considering the frequent black swan events happening around us, or serious public health crises like COVID-19, managers should always remain vigilant. Thank you.
Hi, hello everyone. Can you all hear me?
Great, no problem.
Okay, all right, great, yeah. All right, my name is Lei Li, and I'm from University of Nottingham, Ningbo, China. So it is actually the China campus of University of Nottingham in the UK. I'm an associate professor in international business and strategy, and recently I've taken up the role as the country director for China of Academy of International Business. I have enjoyed listening to the presentations so far by all the co-authors of this book. And then it's interesting, and there are really different perspectives. And then some of the chapters really are about internationalization of Huawei and geographically. Okay, so my chapter, which was co-authored with Sunny Lee Sun, University of Massachusetts Lowell, we try to understand one difficult aspect of Huawei and also some other Chinese multinationals, which is about legitimacy. So the title is Gaining Legitimacy, an Uphill Battle for Chinese Multinationals. Next slide, please. Okay, so whenever legitimacy is mentioned, talked about, I guess typically people would say, yes, legitimacy, and there's a widely accepted definition. It is about generalized perception or assumption that an actions of organization are desirable, proper, based on kind of a socially constructed system of norms, beliefs, and values. So that's a pretty much standard definition about legitimacy. And then why there's a legitimacy problem? It's because there are institutional distance. So we want to make a distinction, about the oftentimes presumed international distance and real international distance. So if you look at this graph, so typically when you think about the institutional distance between country A and B, let's say country A is the advanced economy and country B is emerging economy. So basically the idea is, yes, there's a distance, from A to B and B to A. So that's the same institutional distance. But in fact, the real institutional distance based on our, understanding argument is actually, the one below. So from A to B and from B to A are not exactly the same. From country A, which is advanced economy, to country B, which is emerging economy, it is actually downhill. And then from country B to country A, from emerging economy to advanced economy, it is actually uphill. So basically for Huawei and other Chinese multinationals, in fact, and for that matter, we can talk about many other emerging market multinationals. When they go to advanced economies, typically they fight an uphill battle trying to gain legitimacy. Okay, then here a key point is we want to get to a deeper level, because if we say and the legitimacy is due to the perception, and then whose perception? So we basically trying to argue, and since legitimacy is conferred upon or attributed to organization by whom? By actually different stakeholders. Just like beauty, it resides in the eyes of the beholder. So when we talk about legitimacy, we can say the legitimacy from the perspective or from the perception of the customers, based on perception of employees, based on perception of other stakeholders. So that's why we try to develop a stakeholder engagement perspective in trying to understand better the legitimization issue of Huawei, in this chapter. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so since I was talking about stakeholders, so let's take a look. There are quite some scholars. They have been talking about stakeholders, and there are different frameworks, categorizations, taxonomies. And then here we have drawn upon the work by Post and his colleagues published in California Management Review. So they categorize stakeholders in terms of their resource-based stakeholders, like customers, employees, and investors. Their industry-based stakeholders, like suppliers, labor unions, trade associations, regulators, And then there's also social political stakeholders, which refer to like local communities, governments, non-profit or non-government organizations. Okay, so here and we show these three different categories of stakeholders. Now, if we compare, for example, you have the home country stakeholders, you have host country stakeholders. There are actually two important issues and to look at. One is, and compare your home country and host country. And are you going to perceive these different stakeholders in the same way? So for example, let's say, are the labor unions are important in both your home country and the host country? So clearly, and I think we can agree, yes, in your home country, and some of the stakeholders you don't think are very important, and they might be very important in the host country. Okay, so in particular, when we compare China and developed Western countries, and the differences are sometimes very substantial. Okay, and then you know, this is one point. So basically, and you know, whether stakeholders are equally important in different countries. And second, and even the stakeholders are really important, equally important in your home country and host country, and whether the way and in engaging these the same stakeholders the same. Okay, so for example, and the governments are very important stakeholders in China. In fact, probably the most important stakeholders in China. Well, governments are also very important in other countries, even in developed Western countries. Governments are also very important. But the key issue is, and the Chinese firms, and when they try to engage the governments in China, and you know, they tend to try to develop, for example, personal level and the connections, and then in you know, by doing that, to influence the government officials in doing certain things in their favor. But in the host countries, and here we focus on developed Western countries, the way of engaging governments are very different. Basically, you still try to influence them, but basically you try to do like political lobbying, and also you know, other things trying to influence and the policies, maybe standards. Okay, so so that's why, and these are really different ways of engaging the governments. Okay, and then another thing is the media is very different in China compared to the media in other countries, in particular in developed Western countries. So Chinese companies, and they don't really you know, perceive the media in China as that critical, even though they still say sometimes they're important, and they want media to report good stories about their companies. But basically, the way of engaging the media is very different in China, and then you know how they should engage the media in the developed Western countries. Okay. So anyway, here we try to compare, you know, between China and developed Western countries. So home country is China, and host country and is developed Western country. So here we basically saying, yeah, there are different key stakeholders, and there are different ways of engaging the stakeholders. That's why, and why legitimization is so complex for Huawei and other Chinese multinationals is because of such differences. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we try to identify two main problems which are very different by nature. So one problem, and we call it home country rooted problems, basically, and we call it stakeholder engagement deficiency. So what does that mean? It means, and either sometimes you misidentify the key stakeholders in the host country, or even you have identified the key stakeholders and you just are not sure, or you don't have the capabilities of engaging these key stakeholders effectively, okay, because of your administrative heritage back in a home country. So one problem, and we call it stakeholder engagement deficiency. And that causes legitimization problems. And the second problem we call, negative stereotyping, and which we basically saying it's a host country, in this case, a developed Western country rooted problems. So it's called negative stereotyping of Chinese multinationals. Here, there are two attributes, if you will. One is the liability of country of origin. Okay, and then the other one is liability of opaqueness, lack of transparency. So basically from the stakeholders in the developed Western countries, here we emphasize governments and media. So why? And there's negative stereotyping. And one is, well, they try to associate Huawei and in fact, for that matter, other Chinese multinationals and with the country of origin. So just like and the head of 5G business unit of Huawei recently made this point. Okay, if you talk about national security or cyber security, and then if you think that as a technical issue, yeah, we can work out something. But if you associate national security and to the political systems or treat it as a political issue, and then that's very tough and for Huawei to deal with. Okay, so that's why the liability of country of origin and is really associated with negative stereotyping. But of course, there's also a lack of transparency issue. I think recently, and the I remember correctly, and the CEO of Huawei and North America or US resigned. And then I think one of the other senior executives, also American, the same, and he was trying to advise Huawei to be more transparent. But how much more transparent and Huawei should be, that's of course an issue. So we are trying to say because of these two main problems, one is stakeholder engagement deficiency. The other one is negative stereotyping because of the nature is very different. There's need to have different intervening strategies for a company like Huawei, to adopt in order to gain or enhance local legitimacy. Okay, so we're basically talking about there are two big types of adaptation strategies. One we call a negotiation. Okay, the other one is called defensive. So whether it's about engaging the governments or media, one strategy is called negotiation. Okay, with the government, because of various stakeholders, I think some of the presenters already mentioned, because there are other stakeholders, just like recently, like TikTok, why it hasn't been banned, because it actually hurts the benefits of important stakeholders. So that's why, and there's actually room for Huawei to negotiate with the governments because, banning Huawei's products and services are going to hurt the value or interests of other stakeholders. So there's actually room for look at the network of stakeholders to make sure there's maybe like co-creative approach, to deal with the government. Okay, so this is called negotiation. Same with media, and Huawei used to be poor in engaging the media. For example, Ren Zhengfei used to be inclusive. Okay, yeah, basically just one last point. Okay, so basically, negotiation, the other approach we call it defensive. So why sometimes, if you believe this is not, fear, you try to proactively defend yourself and in engaging the government's media. Okay, so for example, Huawei recently tried to hire top legal law offices and the PR.
Please conclude and move to the next presenter.
Okay, yeah.
Sound cut off on last speaker's presentation.
Shall I begin?
Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. This is Andy Purdy. Hello from Washington, D.C. It's great to be with you, and I look forward to the possibility that we'll have follow-up conversations on a number of these issues. I think the global community is really shirking its responsibility to address real cybersecurity risk in an objective and transparent manner. Just as I think the global community needs to step up and do something about the digital divide with 3 billion people unconnected around the world. It's really going to have an impact on the prosperity of the world and perhaps counterintuitively on the fight against climate change. Next slide. So it's certain concepts that Huawei believes, and although my responsibilities are in the United States, I guess because of my prior experience with the US government and with a defense contractor, I've been to 26 countries for Huawei. And there's certain principles that apply. And I'm pleased that I've been able to advocate for a safer cyberspace, much more so than defending Huawei or defending China. Trying to promote a safer cyberspace, trying to promote competition so that we can drive greater security, more innovation, lower cost, and greater resilience. So some of the concepts that we believe are very important in cybersecurity and privacy: integrity and trustworthiness, accountability and capability, openness and transparency. These are some of the things that the global community can promote. These are some of the things that, because cybersecurity and privacy is a shared responsibility, we're all in this together. And so there are things that we must do more of, we must do that we're not doing globally, and within each individual country, the responsibilities of the key stakeholders to make sure there's an understanding of the risk and what can be done about it, and how it can be transparent, because transparency is key, because the global community and individual countries, individual nations need to have an objective and transparent basis for knowing which products are worthy of trust. And conformance programs, the idea of setting requirements using not just regulatory forces, but using market forces. So procurement requirements, requirements on supply chain risk, and transparency, disclosure within governments of what the companies are doing, the telecom and mobile operators, the equipment suppliers, and other third-party suppliers. This is very important so that we know that there's a basis for trust, because cybersecurity, since I left the White House staff in 2003, cybersecurity has been something people talk about, but not enough is done on it. And we are, as a global community, are going to become increasingly dependent on the technologies that are spurred and enabled by 5G, because 5G is really a platform for enabling what is expected to be the growth of millions of jobs around the world, gross domestic product to increase trillions of dollars. And as we focus on this, as I said, let's not forget the digital divide. Let's not forget that there are many who are underskilled and unskilled in all over the world. And we certainly have a major issue with that in the United States. And if we don't think about these things, if we don't plan for the future of work, what's going to happen with robotics, automation, big data analytics, and artificial intelligence, we're not going to make progress, and people are going to be left behind. And it's unnecessary, and shame on us. Next slide. So one of the important things is that there need to be standards and best practices, again, using market forces, regulation when necessary, disclosure. So we believe that there needs to be an objective and transparent basis for knowing which products and services are worthy of trust, that is fundamental. So there need to be conformance programs for not just the equipment suppliers, although that's important, but for the telecom and mobile operators also, because they control the networks, they control the systems. And in this shared responsibility, in this generation of facts, and frankly, in my country in the last couple of years and in this most recent presidential campaign, there's really a double standard. We want the other guy to have evidence, the other person to have facts. No, because of the significance of the threat, there are at least 5 nations in the world who have the ability to virtually implant hidden functionality, malware, in hardware and software. I did an editorial meeting with the New York Times last year, and David Sanger, their national security correspondent, when I made this point, he said, no, Andy, there are 6 countries that can do this. And so when you look at a number of the issues around the world, it wasn't because of 5G technology that these thefts and intrusions and attacks happened. It wasn't because of Huawei equipment that these attacks happened. We as a global community cannot be distracted by attention based on simply where a country is headquartered. We need to look at what are the facts. How can the countries and companies demonstrate, and how can they be held accountable? Next slide. So we believe it's important that no one be trusted. We believe it's important that we have to assume dirty networks. There are mechanisms in place where products can be tested, all the updates can be tested, and there can be accountability. So for example, there have been some great work done by the UN and others on norms of conduct. We saw recently that the China government released a global initiative on data security with some very important provisions in it. So there's been years of work on norms of conduct around the world, but we have to get to the point that not just no spy agreements, there need to be mutual trust agreements. Governments need to sign these. Governments need to sign these norms of conduct, but also companies do. We need to hold folks accountable, similar to the European privacy rules, where there are tremendous penalties when companies violate. We need to have penalties so that when countries and companies violate the norms, they will be held accountable in a concrete way. So we all have to work together on this, and that includes research and development. We're involved in about 30 some joint innovation centers around the world. The global community has to not just work for innovation, although that's important, but the competitive environment can help make that happen. We have to do innovation for greater security, greater assurance, and greater transparency. What kinds of third-party companies or third-party technologies could be interposed into the networks and systems of equipment suppliers, of telecom and mobile operators, so that the outside world can have a greater basis for knowing that things are really trustworthy? Because lives are going to become increasingly dependent, our way of life, our industry sectors and subsectors are going to be increasingly dependent on these technologies, on these information and communication technologies. We need to know that these systems and processes and technologies will be available when we need them, and that the data on which they rely to function adequately are going to be available, and it's going to be accurate. So again, let's work together. Let's address some of these global issues. For example, globally, the global community needs to do something about malicious activity in cyberspace. We can work together to reduce the frequency, impact, and risk of malicious activity, and we're not doing it, and it's time we start. Thank you very much.
Chang, you're up. You may want to start with question for Serena. She had to leave for class soon.
Okay. So, Wenxian, I'm on, or is there somebody else? Okay, very good. So lots of interesting presentations, making up a whole. I've got a few questions coming from the audience that I want to raise in the very limited time, and I'm going to try and link several concepts, and they are directed to all of you. So jump in, don't wait, don't be silent. Please be brief. We have very few minutes. We have 12 minutes actually. The first question really has to do with coordination between the company, Huawei, and the Chinese state. That is to say, is there any planning coming from the State Council? What is the degree of alignment with state interest? Which relates to a question asked by one of the audience members: how can local users, local networks, be assured that there are no Trojan horses implanted within the local technological network that are being implemented at the country or regional level? So question on coordination with state interest.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a question about the Southeast Asian countries, and I want to thank Dr. He for a great question.
It is indeed, yes.
Yeah, it's so in terms of what we addressed in our chapter, when we talked about the China's relationship with Huawei, the one thing we mentioned is the China 2025 initiative, like where the Made in China 2025 plan, where they wanted to like change the perception of China from a massive production mindset to being the world supplier of like high quality and high value products. And I believe this is the one thing that Huawei has adopted, although China actually gave up that initiative in 2019 after like being, all the sanctions and the issues with the US. In terms of the actual, like, the strong actual alignment, we haven't addressed that, but there is a very good New York Times article that we came across, and I can copy that and paste it in the chat, and discussed how Huawei basically, Huawei is proud to say that it's mainly driven by its employees, and China has no shares in the company. In terms for the other question, and I just pasted that link, to address the other question of local involvement, it is there in terms of local responsiveness and local engagement. One of the main initiatives for Huawei was the Open Lab that allows collaboration development of solutions for enhancing product competitiveness, value chain with customers, training of people. 2 among the 12 in the world, like the Open Labs, are in Thailand and Singapore. They offer training, career certification, proof of concept testing, and it also provides an exchange platform to exchange opinions. And Huawei's Open Labs were able to support startup incubations, not just in Singapore and Thailand, but also in surrounding countries like Malaysia. I hope this answers your question. I can provide my email in the chat window if others have any other question.
Very good. Let me further raise the question of the concept of Trojan horses, which is of course a fear that the United States has raised through the application of its export control laws with some of its NATO allies. No one has replied to that concern. I understand this of course relates to the notion of a clean network alliance propounded by the Trump administration and its current Secretary of State, Pompeo. So who wants to address the question of Trojan horses? How does one ensure that there are indeed no Trojan horses so that Huawei can be viewed as a neutral company providing a service to its local users, high quality service and underlying technology?
Let me make a point. The Open Network program that Secretary Pompeo has been pushing, a former U.S. national security official said that the Clean Network program is not about security. It could have been about security, but the kinds of principles that the US 5G security strategy, the Department of Defense 5G strategy, requires objective standards that can be proven. The former principal deputy to the Director of National Intelligence in the US said that the government can test for backdoors. We are open with our transparency centers, and frankly, the US government did not listen in on Angela Merkel's phone calls some years ago because they used Huawei technology. The fact is we have to have regional transparency centers using a model like the recent Network Equipment Security Assurance Scheme, the NESSIS, so that all products can be tested for backdoors. And then the former principal deputy said, those can be tested for, and in terms of access to information, the protocols are in place that we can prove that we are not improperly accessing data and sending it to China. So it's one thing, promises are one thing, proof is another. We and all companies should be required to prove that they're not subject to foreign influence.
But the standard in matters of national security is not a court type standards in terms of balance of equities. It's usually an interagency process that's quite secretive and produces a decision that's applied in a haphazard sort of way. Wouldn't you say?
Well, yes, but the question of how do you address national security risk in a way that's comprehensive and transparent, that can be done. And again, the telecom and mobile operators control the networks, so they can see the anomalous activity, if there is any. And the idea that you have to have continuous monitoring, like an excellent program the US has across the government agencies, continuous diagnostic and monitoring program, the ability to connect the dots across the telecom and mobile operators, the equipment suppliers, the computer emergency response teams around the world, that together with independent testing of the equipment provides an adequate level of assurance. And to make the global community safer, it needs to be done relative to everyone's equipment.
Yeah. Okay.
Next question. Oh, somebody else wants to address that as well?
May I just follow up to Andy's, comments just. So basically, one is we are talking with Trojan horse, is it like a technical problem? Okay, so if someone wants to argue Huawei's technology is so advanced, companies in other countries cannot really technically find out whether there's Trojan horse or not. That seems to me, kind of unbelievable. Okay, so if it's a technical issue, and I do believe, and it's solvable. Okay, but if you say, well, it is about the government's power or Chinese governments want to, leverage this, and I would say, I was talking about stakeholder, and the governments are always the most powerful stakeholder anywhere. Okay, so if Chinese government, could do something, and then so are the other governments. Okay, so I wouldn't say, it's just like Andy was saying, it should not be geared toward just one particular country or one particular company. And you should have like a fair platform. Okay, if potentially there are risks, okay, and you should treat the companies, the products, the countries in the same way. Okay, and it's based on the efforts of global community.
Okay, a question. We're seeing the advent of techno-nationalism, I guess. One of the questions that I have, which nobody raised, is the question of competitors. Who are the competitors for Huawei? I mean, in a free market type global economy, or quasi-free, or however you wish to term it, we really only have two actors who are basically Scandinavians, Nokia and Ericsson. At various points in time in the past few months, the United States government talked and downplayed the idea of a purchase or a joint venture alliance by a US firm and one of the two competitors. What explains this lack of competition on the part of the United States? Somebody familiar with the US technology environment. And why are we finding ourselves with one major single player in the field of equipment in that area? And wouldn't the answer to all of these questions of Trojan horses and fears of the advent of a single order lie in the existence of two or three major competitors providing rival systems? That's a lot of questions I've asked. Who wants to reply to that? Mario, you're in Germany, I believe. Germany is sort of between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, thank you very much.
The U.S. government and
yeah, well, as I figured out during my presentation, I think the Huawei approached their market entry in Germany in a very smart way. Incrementally, they gained their market share over the years. They started gaining the technological know-how, and later they get connected to key local politician makers, as well as to the leading telecommunication providers. That was hardly recognized by competitors as Nokia and Ericsson. And today they are comparatively too weak in comparison to Huawei. So I think from my point of view, there is no real competition in terms of the telecommunication infrastructure at the moment. And there are not any serious alternatives. Nokia is trying hard to increase their competitive positioning, Ericsson as well. But as far as I understand, I'm not an engineer, but what I see in terms of the market shares and in terms of the network building, comparatively, they are not that strong as Huawei at the moment.
We have very little time left, and there is a question that really should be asked. Is, in a sense, the US, certainly the defense establishment, looking at the possibility of leapfrogging 5G and looking at 6G and other technologies? Has any of you encountered literature or studies or research reports looking at the strategy of leapfrogging, which is what China has been doing for the last 20 years in a sense in various fields of technology. That is to say, let the energy be expended on 5G while research is moving forward within defense establishment shops, looking at a much more advanced technology, which would be first introduced in defense areas and then gradually commercialized over the next 10 to 20 years. So what's the state of 6G and other more advanced technologies? How much time have we got left? We've got 2 minutes left.
No, John, we already, time is already up. I think that we should continue the conversation maybe at the time. Let's,
okay. Anyone up on the latest technologies going beyond 5G? From a commercial point of view in the United States, a lot of users are not quite ready for 5G and are quite happy with 4G, commercially speaking. But it's fair to say that defense users are probably moving beyond that already. So that in the debate about 5G from the point of view of creating a safe network and a critical infrastructure that's insulated from quote unquote Trojan horses may be moot, actually. Anyone on that?
Okay, I think, regarding that, I don't know whether that's really addressed your central question. And even in China, and some people are arguing that if 5G, the application related to 5G are really lagging behind. So some people say and in China, a lot of money has been spent on 5G, but the real applications are really far behind. So that's why some people are saying, well, 4G is actually pretty sufficient, and at this time, and even maybe in the coming years. So I mean, back to your comment, yes, and in China, even some people say 4G is good enough, and for the time being, okay. So that's one thing. Secondly, and you're asking about alternative, maybe even more advanced technologies. If I remember correctly, Elon Musk wants to have a totally different system. It's based on satellites. That's really different than 5G or 6G. Well, I mean, theoretically, it's probably possible, and how quickly it can happen, that's certainly a different issue. Yeah, and another thing I want to point out is Huawei is willing to license. Okay, so it's not like there's just one dominant technology owned by one single company. Huawei is willing to license. That could be approach to solve some of the problems.
So you're saying that the licensing approach would nullify the concerns about a monopoly on the part of Huawei in terms of global strategy?
Well, if the concern is with the national security, yes. I mean, that's part of the solution. Okay. If the concern is how much money Huawei may make, well, I mean, that's an economic aspect. I don't think people really are so concerned with how much money and Huawei can make.
So yeah, we need to wrap up.
Yeah.
Christopher.
Okay, good. Yeah, thank you very much. From
Andy
my point of view, I have to close the session now. Sorry for that. As a board member of the Chinese Globalization Association and the China Goes Global Conference, thank you very much to all of the presenters and all the authors of the book chapters. To Andy from Huawei, thank you for your insights. Thank you to the organization team from EM Lyon, in particular Polly, who managed the session today and helped to organize all this. I know that it's a lot of work. I will thank you also, the main sponsor of this event, the Simon Fraser University, as Wenxian already introduced. And I would like to say 2 words about the project. So this project started, the Huawei Goes Global. This project started as a co-work between Wenxian and Ilan Elon and me 1.5 years ago exactly. So that was in April 2019, and we had a call for paper for this book and for the topic, and we got so much response on this, more than 50 submissions and contributions. So we set up 2 books, 2 volumes, and you know that we have now 2 books out, 2 volumes on Huawei Goes Global. If you click on the next slide, you see that for those who are joining the session today, we have a special, this is here the announcement about the book came out. The book came out 2 weeks ago about, and there's a special discount for this book of 20%. For those who are interested in the discount, let me know by email, or I put I put the code into the chat. It is from now on, from today. So in the book or the 2 books, they are made of 2 volumes. They are made of 5 chapters: political economy and public policy, the rise of Huawei as multinational enterprises. So all the topics we dealt with today: Huawei's development strategy, regional perspectives on Huawei from all over the world, from all continents, and the crisis management and communication. So it's really encompassing, and it's really, nice to read. So I hope with the session today, we nudged you a little bit to go deeper. Andy already suggested to make a second session here on this very interesting topic. Looking forward to it. And thank you very much. And I hand over to Wenxian.
I think that's wrap up the whole session. Thank you so much for all the contributions. We'll keep in touch. We hope we can have a similar program in the future. Thank you
very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.